anonymousretailer.com.
Hello, anonymous retailers. I'm Jason from anonymousretailer.com. And on today's episode, we're covering why nobody's ever gone out of business by selling out of items, but many have gone out of business by having too much, with OG retail analyst Matt Powell. I'm excited about this one. Let's get into it. Matt, how you doing today, sir?
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with us. So let's
Glad
go
to do it.
back to July.
Okay.
You were on a Shop, Eat, Surf webinar that was right about the pinnacle of tariff mania. We had Tiffany Montgomery was heading up the call. We had the CEO of Elevate, the owner of Evo on there, and I believe the president of Vizsla. So we had a retailer, two manufacturers, and you on the conversation. I thought it was a fantastic conversation about the state of tariff mania, with the unknowns that we all knew during that period. You know, about a third of the way the call, though, they pivoted around you. And this was, I'm taking this out of context, so I'm paraphrasing this a little bit. But you dropped a lightning bolt in there that went like this here. You said nobody ever went out of business because they sold out of things, but many have gone out of business because they had too much. You had 1000% of my attention when you said that. I was on the edge of my seat because that's at the heart of the content that we create here at Anonymous Retailer. That pretty much summed up the message that we convey. When I immediately knew that I needed to take that quote and flip it off into a blog piece, because that was highly authoritative, and it couldn't be any more crystal clear to not only the environment, but just fundamental retail practice that I think a lot of people lose sight of. And ultimately, that became the most trafficked blog piece that we had on the website for the year.
Wow.
From two sides. I'm just a guy in my spare bedroom blogging about retail. And so a good post, maybe it gets 100 views. That post got like 500 views, unique views. And then on LinkedIn, I posted it, and you just hit me with a thank you in the comments, and it got like 2,000 views on LinkedIn. So it went bananas. And so as I started to develop this podcast channel, I had you earmarked that I've got to sit down with Matt Powell, and we have got to discuss this statement in detail. So let's just start right here, okay? Why do you think that message resonated so powerfully with the specialty retailers?
Well, I think a couple of parts to it. I think one, retailers are, and I was a retailer for a number of years before I started yakking about retail. And, I think retailers as a group are optimists. They believe tomorrow's going to be better than yesterday, and last week is not going to be as bad as next week. And so oftentimes I think retailers get over exuberant about a new product or a new line or a new opportunity. And the tendency is to overbuy. When there's a hot item out there, the retailer's desire is to get as much of that hot item as I possibly can until it's not a hot item anymore. Now I don't want it. So I think that it resonates with people to really think about, what's my role in the market? What's my place? What's my plan for my business? How does that interface with the products that I'm buying? How do I think about myself as a retailer? And be a bit, I don't want to say pessimistic, but maybe more pragmatic about the approach to assortment and assortment planning.
Yeah, two things that I want to add in there to piggyback on your statement. I refer to it on the blog as the retail fog. It's the you lose sight of the horizon. You are you're excited about how good things feel right now. You lose sight of the where the volume's going to start to taper off. And it gets foggy. And people get caught up in that. They think it doesn't. It's not going to end, and they keep buying. All of a sudden, now you've got this bag of inventory that you've got to figure out how to move. Your cash is trapped, and now all the margin gains that you had made off of that velocity are now being eaten up by just moving this excess.
Exactly. I always like to say, no matter how many you sold, the last sale is always the least profitable of all your sales, because at some point you've got to liquidate, right? And so The more you chase, the more likely you're going to take a real haircut on the last sale. But the last sale is always the least profitable one.
Yep, you're 100% correct. It's that my second point here to add on to what you're talking about is, is that I just don't feel that a lot of retailers, especially in the specialty space, down the smaller guys, that are really feeling their way through it. They're not really thinking about the downstream effect of, the buying. We're getting ready to roll into holiday buying season here in the next couple of months. How many of these little guys out there do you think are really paying attention to what that exit should look like? They look at the dollars that it's going to create, but they don't really take into account of what the exit should look like.
Right, right. And, I think the larger chain, because of the number of doors that they have, gives them, if they got 100 doors, you got 100 views on the market, right? And the bigger you are, the more support you're getting from the brands that you're doing business with, the more conversations you're having with them, the deeper understanding you might have. And as an independent, it's really tough because all you know is what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. And that's where you get into trouble, is not knowing what you don't know.
Yep. Getting caught in that fog and not leaning into your data.
I think that's an excellent word, fog.
Yep. Yep. All right. So when you look at some of these struggling retailers right now, what percentage are inventory trapped versus facing real demand problems?
After COVID, we really were in a massive inventory issue everywhere, at the brand, at the factory, at the retailer. And I think, we've worked through most of that at this point. There probably are some isolated retailers out there. I don't we mean to pick on somebody, but let's say you were a Stanley water bottle retailer, okay, which was a bottle rocket for a while. You loaded up on Stanley because every day you were getting people coming in asking for more and more and more, and it reached terminal velocity here, terminal revenue level, and all of a sudden you're stuck with inventory. So I'm sure there are people out there who are sitting with far too much inventory and cash strapped because of that. But my sense is we've corrected a lot of those early issues that we had during COVID, and things are probably in better shape today than they were.
I kind of wish, as crazy as things were during COVID, I kind of wish we could go back to that scarcity a little bit just to get on the other side of velocity.
Yes, no question. Look, I think it's fascinating. You have got a brand like Jordan, $7 billion brand, $8 billion brand, that was built entirely on scarcity. And even at $8 billion, the product is relatively scarce compared to other things. But you've got Nike with this machine behind it, who are looking literally at door level sell-throughs to determine where they put the next allocations and where they don't, and they're dialing things up and down. And it was very, very scientific. So it's interesting that concept of scarcity, you can actually build a big business here. But you can't get greedy. And that's what happened with Jordan, was under the previous management team. Well, I'll back up. I used to say that Jordan, I still say that Jordan is healthy when it grows at about 10% a year.
Which is big. Which is big.
Yeah,
especially at $7 billion.
If your business grows at 3 to 5% a year, right? So the Jordan business is growing at double that rate. Well, under the previous management at Nike, they came in and said, well, why are we holding it back at 10? Because the only reason that it was only growing 10 was because Nike only made 10% more product. And they said, let's blow this up. Let's make 35% more product. And 2 years in a row, they had 35% growth. And then the whole thing collapsed. And so you can't get greedy here. And so I think that's another corollary to this whole idea of understand your place, understand what your fair share is, and make sure that you're keeping supply below demand. And again, that's how you create excitement, I think, on the part of the consumer.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that wanting to be able to squeeze out all of that margin that's sitting on your floor.
Yes, exactly.
And capitalize on all the demand. You don't want the oversupply sitting there while the demand fades off. So why do you think there's such a fear of selling out? Why is this paralysis with retailers versus the risk of overbuying? I think you kind of touched on it a little more, but let's
I just think it's like I lost business. I could have sold 10 more today if I had 10 more. And that's the trap, right? Yes, you could have sold 10 more. So now you go out and buy 100 to get that 10. And next thing you know, you got 90 still sitting there. And so again, the ability particularly for the small retailer to modulate inventory and demand is a big challenge. There's a there's a classic story, and I was going to say one other thing. There are all these blind signals I think that happen in retail. Then we see something happen, and we think it means this when it means that. Classic story. This goes way back when in my men's sportswear days. Bonwit Teller was across the street from the Empire State Building when the Empire State Building had a tremendous amount of men's brands in that building, and oftentimes the executives from those brands would walk through Bonwit Teller on their way to or from lunch. And one day they went into the store. Bonwit put out this rack of wacky jackets. I can't even tell you what the jacket was, but it was something that was very unusual, not seen before. And one by one, the executives bought this. Said, this is kind of interesting. Let's take it back to the office and see what people think. And suddenly the word got out that Bonwit sold out of this jacket in one day. And so everybody suddenly thought there was a trend here that was happening when it really was just people mining the competition for good ideas. And so people suddenly started to rush this into production to get it here. And nobody wanted the jacket. It was too weird, but it sold out in one day. And so there often are false signals, if you will, that delude us into thinking that, a bus full of a bus full of Japanese tourists breaks down near my store, and all of a sudden I sell out of something because they all came in killing time waiting for the bus to be repaired. That's not
Yeah.
repeatable, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean there's a market here. It happened and it's cool, but it doesn't mean that you can build a business around those kinds of false signals.
Yeah. You've got to take a look at the sample set
Right.
historically, stay out of the fog, lean into
Exactly.
the data, and follow it, and let that be your guide. All right, so let's talk about mindset that gets these retailers into trouble. There's this belief that more inventory equals more opportunity.
Well, to some extent, I think there's truth there. But again, I think it has to be data driven and it has to be based on reality of what the potential for you to sell is. Again, just because you bought 10 and sold 10 doesn't mean you buy 100 and you now sell 100. If you bought 10 and sold 10, you buy another 100, maybe you're still only going to sell 10. Maybe you sell 12, but you're not selling out. You're not moving through that inventory. So I think this is part of where the art meets the science in the business here is understanding what my capability as a retailer is, and what I can create and what simply just happens to me. I think some of it is just grounded in their own internal metrics. A retailer opens a store with a business plan, right? They go to the bank and say, I want to buy a building or I want to lease a building. And here's my business plan that says how I'm going to earn enough out to pay for the loan that you're giving me to do this store. That plan's there for a reason. And it may not be right. I would argue that probably 99% of all business plans are not right, but they're close. And if you continue to learn and iterate and change and then learn some more, you're going to get better and better at your plan. I think that's why you see so many successful retailers, independents that have been around a long time. They're the ones who really know their business. And the guy can walk on the sales floor and say, aha, aha, aha. I see these three things happening. Let's do more of that. This isn't working. Let's do less of that. That kind of entrepreneurial sense of what's happening in my world means a lot. So I think careful planning is a part of all of this, and sticking to the plan until you shouldn't stick to the plan. And again, that's the art in this is knowing when you got to change the plan. But planning is really key. It's not a seat of the pants business that says, I think we can sell 1 million of these. Let's buy a bunch.
Yeah, you got to stick to the plan. I agree with you 100%, and I think that's the trickiest part for some of these independents out there. I owned a store here in Houston for a long time. I can speak from personal experience. When you are in it, when you are in that fog, it's really easy to lose sight of the spatial situation around you and what you need to do to right side the ship to get it moving forward. So I think you hit the nail on the head right there by saying you got to stick to the plan, and you have to be very rigid about sticking to the plan, but also being flexible enough to understand that you've got to adjust the plan
Right.
sometimes.
Right.
when it makes sense.
All the time. You got to be adjusting the plan all the time, which doesn't mean that you're obsessing. Last week I sold 7. This week I sold 6. Oh my God, the sky is falling. There needs to be some rationality in all of that, but the plan always has to be adjusted. I always used to say that as soon as the buyer took their pencil off the paper, there was a mistake made somewhere, and that's retail.
And if that mistake's going to be made, hopefully it's a little lighter than heavier.
Exactly.
So that my next point here brings us around to retail fog. We talk about that a lot on the blog, and I think we've aired it out a little bit here. That clouded thinking where optimism drives buying, optimism drives outlook instead of velocity. Big thing we talk about on the blog is letting velocity create optimism. Letting velocity create opportunity instead of optimism creating
Right.
opportunity. So I think you've laid it out a little bit. Well, what's your thoughts on that? Getting on the right side of velocity.
Yeah, well, again, I think there is a virtual cycle here that starts to spin off business as you buy 10, you sell 10 out, you go back and maybe you buy 15 this time. And I know it's not that simple as what I just described, but that is the process that works here. But you move cautiously and you don't move aggressively, because aggressive moves often end up in real unhappiness. So I think it's great that you say, wow, we blew that out, let's get some more, but let's not go 10x on the next order.
Keep it manageable.
Right.
The goal is to sell out,
Right.
not hold on to it for a year.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any good anecdotal stories about things you've seen like that?
Well, there's a million of them. I'll give you a really interesting one. Back in the early aughts, there was a trend called toning shoes that came out. Skechers made a toning shoes. It was originally started by FitFlop and a couple of other brands, but Skechers commercialized it. And the idea behind it was that I'm in somewhat of a state of instability, which uses muscles, and I'm going to lose weight, whatever. Most of those claims proved to be false or incorrect, shall we say. But the shoes did help people who had a knee, hip, ankle problem, and the business took off, went from $0 to $1 billion in 1 year.
Wow.
Which is very unusual, very, very unusual. We've never seen anything like this. And I was looking at the data. I was working with a data firm, so I could see a global data now. And we were going to do a billion to $1.2 billion at retail. That was easy. That's a really easy number to get to. It's deciding how much store number 101 is going to do that makes you a good retailer or not hitting that big number. Anyway, I said to Skechers, hey, this is $1 billion business. You've got 60% market share here. Reebok had another big chunk of it. I said, so that puts you at, say, $600 million at retail, $300 million at wholesale. That's a good place for you to be. Well, the retailers were going wild here and wanted more and more and more and more. Skechers made $600 million worth of product instead of $300 million worth of product. And guess what happened?
The bottom fell out.
It all collapsed. Overnight, the $1 billion business went away. I mean, if you looked up bottle rocket in the dictionary, you would see this shoe. I think that's an indication of a brand not managing the marketplace correctly. A retailer's job in that case was, I need more, I need more, I need more. The brand's job is to say, no, we think this is $1 billion business, and therefore this is all we're going to make, and not anymore. I think they're great examples. I go back to the Stanley hydration bottles again, and I don't mean to pick on Stanley. They're great people. But this thing went like that, and all businesses at some point reached terminal revenue, and Stanley reached that, and there was too much product. And it's pretty much righted itself at this point, but it looked like it was forever, and nothing's forever, unfortunately.
Nothing is forever. Yep. We're always looking for that next wave. And I think that's what gives some of these specialty players some advantage, is that they're able to be nimble and move around quickly if they're playing their cards right with what we're talking about right here, and letting that velocity create opportunity for them and create open dollars for them to go and spend.
Right.
They can pivot a lot faster and be creating better assortment stories than most out there.
Certainly than a big company, right? I mean, A store owner, independent store owner could go in and change his whole store around tomorrow. But you take a chain like, Foot Locker with thousands of doors, they can't change those stores overnight. They just can't. Even if there was desire or demand that they would do that, it can't happen. So, but an independent operator can change his whole look given the inclination to do that. I think one other opportunity for the independent owner is to develop a network of other independent owners with whom you can touch points. Not
Mhm.
necessarily the guy across the street that probably don't want to be sharing data with him, but even when I started out my career, I was a merchandise manager in a department store in Boston, and I developed a network of other merchandise managers around the country who weren't necessarily even part of the same corporation that I was, but people that we liked each other. We were friends. And we would, I'd hear something and I'd pick up the phone and say, "Hey, is this happening or am I hearing some crazy stuff?" Or, "Hey, we've sold out of this. You need to know that and think about it." And so by developing a network of other people who you can share your ideas with, share your experiences with, good and bad, can help everybody do a better job. Because to me, the hardest part for, as I said earlier, the hardest part for the small guy is that they only know what they know.
Yeah, that's true. It is. That was my experience as well when I was operating my store. It was very hard to find people to talk to that really understood what you were dealing with. That's a root of the whole point of why Anonymous Retailer was created, was to just have a place for people to find information
Yep, great.
that's not commonly found.
Right.
I sold skateboards and snowboards, and it was very hard for me to find somebody that I knew that that I could relate to, that I could talk business, that I could talk my struggles with, that I could talk about cash flow with, or developing trends and stuff like that, So I fully back what you're saying of having a good resource pool of confidants that you can talk with.
Exactly. Yep.
So let's get back on this track here with this depth conversation. I'm sure you hear a lot of retailers out there talking about it. I hear retailers talking about it. Idea that I need depth to serve my customers. What do you think the truth is that they're missing?
Well, I think, depth is an interesting tool. I think that when you walk into a store that is under inventoried or badly assorted, you really can't tell what you're looking at. When you go into a store that says, "I believe in this brand and I've got a wall display of this brand," or "I believe in this category and I'm giving it 10 feet of linear space in the store," you know where that retailer stands, and it gives you confidence to buy something there because there's a strong presentation. Depth gives you that. Breadth gives you an over assorted look, a look of lack of confidence as a buyer. I don't know what I'm buying, so I'm just going to buy a bunch of stuff and see what happens. Um, and I think the consumer wants you to be authoritative in your assortment. But at the same time, you've got to modulate that against my plan of how many I can sell and how do I build an assortment that isn't out of control. So again, puts and takes here. But depth means a lot, I think, in terms of really presenting who you are as a retailer. But it's also dangerous in that you may get in too deep.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that statement we were talking about earlier about understanding the data and understanding what that time horizon looks like and making sure that that depth aligns with that time horizon and your budget and the plan. All of those things. It's not your personal bias, like you said. I sold 10 last year. Don't buy 30.
And
Is
look, it can be as simple as, I mean, in terms of evaluating the inventory, to say, okay, my plan is to do X. My plan turn is Y. That means I've got to sell this percentage out a week in order to hit that turnover level. And evaluating, okay, this category, this brand I bought is selling out at a lower liquidation rate than I expected. This brand is selling at a better liquidation rate, or this item is selling at a better liquidation rate, and begin to modulate again your mix based on hitting that goal. And it's not a magic number that every week has got to be 7%. We should be so lucky that it would be that way. But it's a referent, right? That says, I plan to sell 7, I'm selling 3. I got a problem. here. I plan to sell 7, I'm selling 10. Maybe that means that I need to amp up the inventory a little bit. Again, not get carried away here, not double the inventory, but amp it up a little bit. Um, and again, to pull the levers that you have to more effectively run your business.
Yeah, but I'm a big believer of velocity tells you everything against time.
Yes.
And where you are at in the selling cycle, not only the selling cycle, but the volume cycle. And you want to see that velocity ramping up before you hit the volume peak, not necessarily on the backside of it, especially if you're looking to open up dollars and you're open to buy and go out and buy more goods.
Yeah, we talk a lot about we've been talking a lot about how the weather has changed the outdoor business, and I won't get off on that tangent too deeply, but the idea, used to be in the outdoor business, you would deliver everything in August and then hope for snow, and or maybe it was September, but you get the idea. You brought everything in, beautiful assortment, and now you're waiting for it to snow for your customers to come in and say, "I need a new snowboard, I need a new jacket," whatever it happens to be. The weather doesn't cooperate like that anymore. I live in Maine, and we didn't get any snow this year till January. Well, that's too late. Even though we got a lot of snow, that's too late for anybody to make any money on winter if it's coming in January. So we have to rethink that piece of it as well. The old peaks, in my opinion, the old peaks of things like back to school are not the peaks that they once were. They're certainly better than the slack months and slack weeks, but they're not the big peak that they once were, which means you've got to be able to offer customers great stuff 52 weeks out of the year, even though the business is peaking at different times.
That's an interesting point you make. We have a blog post piece that I come back to every year, and it basically sums up exactly what you said. And it's basically everybody looks good in December, but what about the other 11 months of the year?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and that's you summed that up perfectly. So that was a nice touch there. Thank you. So a retailer that sees selling out as a failure versus one that sees it as a strategic success. What's the difference between those two retailers? What do you think that is?
Well, again, at the end of the day in this business, we're here to make profit. It's great to have huge sales, but if we're not making any money, we're in trouble. And the only way you can make money is by selling products at decent margins, keeping the expenses under control. That's a very simple way of saying how you make money here. And so the retailer who wants to grab every single sale that they can get is likely going to find themselves in an inventory situation at some point that means they give back all the gains that they had early and as they were chasing an item up. And find themselves, when it's all said and done, to have lost money on that item or that brand or that category. So there has to be ultimate thinking has to be around profit and how do I make profit here? Sales are a part of how you get the profit, but only if you're selling at great margins, and then only if you're keeping all your other expenses in the line. So that to me is the crux of it here is how do I squeeze the most profit out of an item, not how do I squeeze the most sales out of them.
Yep. High quality sales. We talk about that a lot. You've got to focus in on high quality sales. You control those high quality sales through the size of the inventory. And I think that's a very misunderstood concept to a lot of people who are independent retailers who are very passionate about what they're selling. You see this a lot in a lot of these independent spaces. I was guilty of it when I first started out. I spent 10 years as an operator, and I stepped out into the cold world as a retailer and instantly had to learn that lesson real quick. And it's a cold, hard lesson to learn. But I think it's a very you brought up a great point there that I want to circle back to. I think it's very misunderstood the concept of inventory flows in account to the profitability of a store. They get their compilation from their accountant every month, and it just shows cost of goods sold, and it doesn't reflect all of the inventory that's sitting on their floor that hasn't been transacted on, that's
Right.
losing
Right.
value by the day. How much of that inventory is sitting on a credit card that you're paying high interest on, or how much of it's just sitting there eating up your cash? And that's where this conversation
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep.
that's where this conversation that we're having here today really starts to highlight the the practicalities of what I like to say you need to put a dent in your inventory. You want to see your floor breathing. You want to see the inventory build up and you want to see it come down. And all those cycles, you're just extracting cash to operate your store. But if it just goes up and doesn't come back down, you're in for a world of hurt because all you're going to end up doing is having to pay for that inventory and you're not going to have any cash to cover your bills because the vendor's going to get paid. The vendor always gets paid first.
Yep.
And they're going to get their money if you want to keep the goods flowing. And those big stacks of inventory are just going to start losing value. And that's all the retailer. It's not the vendor's getting their cut no matter what. And it's the only side that's losing value is the retailer side. And we
Yep.
control that through the size of the inventory coming through. That was a great point. Thank you for going on that segue there. So let's get tactical here for a second. For an independent retailer with, let's say, 1 to 3 stores who wants to shift from that optimism-based buying to velocity-based buying, what are the first disciplines you would say they need to install to change their mindset?
Well, I think it comes down to very careful planning. And having a plan that you can readily access and really think about in terms of a day-to-day approach to the business. And again, all plans are wrong ultimately, but if you start with a plan and then you adjust that plan based on what's the reality here. And, someone once said, if you're in battle and the map doesn't match the terrain, trust the terrain because that's where you're standing. And the idea there being that it's, again, I've made a careful plan. Things aren't going to plan. What do I need to adjust to make that work? And how do I evaluate what working means? And velocity is a really critical element of that. If I've got $100,000 worth of inventory and I'm only selling 3% a week, I am not going to make my plan. And it doesn't matter how much more inventory I add, I'm still probably not going to make my plan because I'm not getting that velocity. So how do I create velocity? And there are good ways to create velocity, mostly having the right products, the right brands. And there are bad ways to create velocity like markdowns, which are sometimes necessary, but are really not brand building energy, not retailer brand building energy either. It's a fine line, but I think everything starts with a great plan.
Yeah, I agree. It starts just like we were talking about earlier. We're getting ready to roll around into holiday buying season. The whole cycle starts with the buy and what the exit's going to look like. You
Yes.
can have a good grasp of what the cash flow should look like all the way back in April and May when you're buying for November. You
Right.
should have a good grasp of what to expect. Now, the other part of the plan is you have to execute on it. And I want to come back to a couple of points you made, trust the terrain, but also you were talking about sticking to the buy plan and to having to take markdowns being the last thing you want to do. Something that we like to talk about on the blog is the sales floor execution when you get in a pinch like that, what that needs to look like, the sales floor awareness, the shifting at the floor level. When you have pockets of products selling out, but you've still got $100,000 of products sitting there that's not opening up dollars in the open to buy, you still need to move those goods and you
Yes.
still need to move them without taking a hit to move them. So pivoting on the sales floor awareness, letting everybody know what's sitting there, what's there. As you have this traffic coming in, we've got to be active in selling these goods to move them before this volume band passes us up. But I want to come back and expand on that follow the terrain statement that you made. I like that. I've never heard that before in a buying sense. Expand on that. Let's just a couple of touch points on what following the terrain in that type of environment looks like.
Well, I think the following the map means, I've got this grandiose idea where things are going. Following the terrain means I'm actually standing here on the ground and I'm looking around me and I see what I see and I'm executing against that. It becomes a more practical application, I guess, of the plan. I'm standing here and I see that I'm not selling enough of this and I'm selling more of that. And how do I make that adjustment quickly to maximize sales and profits?
Yeah, that's great. I like that. I'm going to borrow that from you. I'm going to work that into my terminology.
All right. Trust the terrain.
Trust the terrain. I like that. All right. So we've talked about exit strategy. I'm a firm believer of having a clear vision of what the exit looks like. When I'm cutting a PO to send off to somebody. I want to have a clear picture of the downstream flow of what that should look like through my channels. So what do you think that actually looks like for somebody who's got a, say, a gift shop that they're rounding out, getting ready to start buying for holiday time? Like, what kind of cues should they be looking for in that downstream vision of what that exit should look like?
Well, look, again, I think a plan out there says I'm going to do this much per week in October. I'm going to do this much per week in November. I'm going to do this much per week in December, and knowing that I want to be pretty close to zero inventory by December 25th. And again, this is all very theoretical, but you can put a percentage liquidation rate on all those things and work backwards and say, okay, is it reasonable that I can sell $100,000 worth of this product? All right, what's it going to take? What am I going to have to sell each week? Let me go back and look at my historicals. Have I ever sold this much of an item in October and that I need to get to? And so you're taking historical data, you're taking your own internal planning, and you're layering the two things over each other. And it begins to say, well, I shouldn't buy 100,000. I should only buy 70,000. That's all I've got to sell. And maybe I go back to my brand and say, I might need another $10,000 or $20,000, but I'll know that by mid-November. Can we work something out that maybe makes that sit available to me? Probably most brands aren't going to let you do that, but it doesn't hurt to answer again, you watch an item, you say, I'm expecting 5% liquidation in October and you get 9. Maybe you go back and try to get more before the end of the season. You ramp your program, your plans up. But it's also done because it's rooted in real numbers. You're going to find yourself less likely to get really out of control. And so if my plan is to sell 5% in October and I'm selling 7, I'm not suddenly going to double my order. That
Right.
would not be warranted based on that. Certainly, I might go back and try to get some more based on that information, or I might say, "What? I'm going to sell out. Going to be clean. I'm going to be ready to convert to the next season or faster. Maybe I'll introduce some next season product earlier than I normally would to try to make sure my floor is filled and I've got product to sell, and maybe get an early read on the next season's trends." I mean, I think there are positives again to selling out that makes you more nimble as a retailer. And nimbleness is another interesting idea that I think is important. If you're overloaded with inventory, just like if you're overweight, you're not nimble. If you're thin, your inventory is thin, your body is thin, you're much more nimble and able to shift with whichever way the fashion winds are blowing your business.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just recap that real quick. Starting way back at the buy. All right. So we're using data points to align up with the plan to give us a little bit more of a clearer forecast of what our booking should look like. And then as those orders start to roll in and start selling, we're gauging velocity against time to judge, should we go top off a little more? Should we pump the brakes? Or are we already just looking at maybe expanding out next year?
Right. And again, you can put a number on all of those things. And
Yeah.
it's say, my expectation is in October, I'm going to sell 3% a week. And I'm going to be happy with that because October is not a great month, but it's telling me there's something here. And really putting it into a hard number that you sit down every Sunday and go through the books and say, okay, did I get my 3% here that I expected, or not? And then how does that impact my future plans, my future purchases or cancellations in that case?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I just don't think too many people really think like that. Down at the small, obviously bigger operations, they have a lot more elaborate systems.
Right.
But I really think that that's the key differentiator in successful independence at the small scale is the ones who can really visualize their business downstream like that and have the tactics in place of how to manage that inventory. I mean, really, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is managing cash flow, and making
Right.
sure that you're not blowing
Exactly.
yourself up.
Exactly.
And you've got enough to cover inventory, you've got enough to pay bills, and you've got enough to live and fight for another day.
Exactly. I actually had a conversation last week with some folks about merchant princes. And when I was growing up in this business, there were merchant princes out there who would say, this is going to work, this is not going. Mickey Drexler, who really put the Gap on the map and now is at J. Crew, was a merchant prince, and he could sense a fashion trend happening. I think those days are over, and I'm not saying everybody needs to be an accountant in terms of being a successful retailer, but there are so many metrics that we can use to judge the health of our business and help prevent us from getting into trouble down the road. It's really a key attribute, I think, for today's successful retailer.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you're right. It's moving way faster these days. And back when the Gap was relevant, you could be a tastemaker like that because things were not moving fast and you
Right.
could hide mistakes and we didn't have access to the tastemakers like we do. I can pull up my phone and find 5,000 different tastemakers now. Back then, the Gap was awesome. And
Yeah,
that's where you went.
exactly.
So yeah, I agree with you. Completely different. All right. So shifting a little bit. Quality of inventory versus quantity. You touched on that a little bit earlier when we were talking about having depth versus breadth. Which is more important? I like going around and finding cool retail. So I'm not wowed by size. I'm wowed by wow, this is a cool environment. They're carrying cool brands and they're paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah, there's so many layers to this. I think the first thing is you have to know who your customer is in order to be successful here. Once you really know who your customer is, then it becomes somewhat easy to curate for that customer. And curation is, I think, a lost art in retail today. The sort
Yeah.
of thing, okay, I know there back in the day on Lincoln Road in Miami, there was a store called Home, and it was probably the most highly curated store I'd ever been in. It was aimed at a wealthy South American gay male who was probably 25 years old. And everything in the store was right for him. They had shoes, clothing, music, books, accessories, home furnishings, the gamut. And it was for this narrow a consumer. Luckily, well, not luckily, intentionally, there were a lot of that attribute, that cohort that I just described in
Yeah.
Miami at the time, and so the store was wildly successful. Wildly
It was perfect demographic for a store like that.
Precisely. If you're wherever, if you know who your customer is, and then you begin to curate that assortment around them, you get a core of the business, and then you really have again. This is where the art comes in. The depth of what do I have? Some consumers don't want to see a lot of a product because they think they want it to be just for them. So instead of having 100 of a shirt out on the floor, they only want to see 4
Yep.
because that makes it feel special for them. Depends on the customer. Not every other customers want to look like everybody else, and so 100 is an affirmation that this is the right thing for me. So again, know your customer, curate your assortment, and then balance the depth of breadth issue within that. And I think depth and breadth vary by whatever consumer you're talking to, but there is the right amount of depth and the right amount of breadth that matters. And so I don't think you can say you need to be X on this axis and Y on that axis for depth versus breadth. I think it becomes evident to you as you really understand who your customer is.
Yeah. Big thing we talk about on the blog is letting the customer reveal themselves to you.
Right.
And that was a big lesson I had to learn when I first opened my store. Was I came in with these ideas of what I thought we were going to be. I mean, I had to separate myself from that personal bias real quick, and just listen to the customer and just let them tell me what they were after. I mean, I think that is a vital key to success in retail is not just verbally and vocally listening to the customer through conversation, but through metrics like average selling price, margins that are held at price points, and just let the customer talk to you through the data and and learn to curate your assortment around that.
Exactly.
I think that is it's a very unique skill set to have in retail. And if you can master those skill sets, you'll be highly successful because you'll be able to offer a broader assortment with the dollars you have available by targeting the customer through where they want to spend money with you instead of having all your price points out of whack, way too high, way too low. You can take a sample set for a quarter, a month, a year, whatever, and really zero in on where the customer wants to be at and do business with you. And
Exactly.
that's how you can be most effective with that budget and plan that we talked about a few minutes ago.
Exactly.
So, what metrics tell us that we're really squeezing the most juice out of this inventory versus leaving money on the table?
Well, again, I think that it varies by product category. For, if you're talking about shoes, for instance, which have a lot of sizes and colors, by nature of the category, you're going to turn that inventory more slowly than you would a t-shirt, which, only comes in 4 sizes and maybe only 2 colors. And so the metrics are really different by category and frankly by retailer, by the kind of retailer you are. If you're a price-driven retailer, maybe you're going to turn faster. If you're more of a consumer packaged goods kind of retailer, you're going to turn goods faster. And again, if you're a shoe retailer, you're probably going to turn goods slower. The metrics are not. There's no magic number that says 5% a week is what you want to hit. I think it also comes back to your financial planning. If you say, I've got $100,000 worth of inventory and I'm going to sell $10,000 this month. Well, that means I've got to sell something like 2.5% a week, right? So could be a great metric for you as a retailer. And I think it becomes evident to you as you do it. You're going to see that, my average liquidation rate on a weekly basis is X percent. And that becomes my touchstone. Looks like that I'm able to, if I'm turning it faster than my average, then maybe that's where I want to step up and go back and get more inventory. If I'm turning slower than my average, maybe that's where I want to tap the brakes a little bit.
Yeah, I think the point we need to drive home here is that you need to understand inventory turn. The higher your turn, the less cash you have sitting on the floor, the more cash you're producing. It starts slowing down. You probably need to pump the brakes on buying. If it gets too fast, you maybe need a little bit more inventory to slow that down. Good rule of thumb for somebody who's out here sweating this out day to day as an independent retailer, 4 turns, probably a good benchmark for somebody. Maybe you're running faster than that. Maybe you're running a little slow, but historically understanding what you turn at, and you want to see that turn rate moving up. You don't want to see your turn rate moving backwards.
Right. And just by contrast, if you're a footwear retailer, you're probably only turning 2.5, 2.25 times a year, just as an example, because again, the amount of sizes and colors you have to service. And so every industry has a different sweet spot there, but there is a sweet spot. And knowing what that is, again, maybe through your network, maybe through industry associations, you can zero in on the right number for your store.
Yeah, and that footwear business, that takes a thick spine because that's a lot of inventory sitting there looking at you every day.
Every day.
Every day. That's a lot of weight staring back at you. All right, so this conversation really is rooted in a tariff discussion, the idea that a tighter margin environment with supply chain uncertainty, that there's actually safety controlling your supply line strategically. Do you have any thoughts to add to that?
Well, look, I mean, this news that came out today about the Supreme Court avoiding most of the tariffs that Trump has put in, I think it's just going to result in 18 more months, maybe longer, of chaos. He clearly is committed. I've been watching the news. He's clearly committed to some tariffs in some way. And if these are out, then he's going to figure out a way to put some other ones in. In the meantime, the customer's getting whipsawed. Actually, a government study last week put out that 90% of the tariffs have been paid by the consumer. The government's going to have to give back all of this illegal tariff money that they've taken. Someone said it was $175 billion, but I think that gets tied up in litigation for years, and we may never see it. It could go back to whoever paid the tariff, likely the brand, maybe the factory, but it's never going to get to the consumer. And I expect prices to remain elevated. I don't think brands want to go out and say, okay, tariffs are off, I'm dropping my prices back to where they were pre-tariffs, because if they're back again in some other way, you don't want to whipsaw the customer that way. So I think prices are going to stay up, which is a tough on business. I'm really pessimistic about the next 18 months or so. And then don't get me started on the economy and how 50% of the retail consumption is going to 10% of the population. That's a whole nother nasty story out there. So, it's going to be a tough time, I think, to be a retailer.
So it's still risk on.
Yes.
Control the inventory. Don't blow yourself up. Keep the supply lines tight. put a dent in your inventory, max out your margins, control your promotional environment. Does that sound about right?
Yep. And you know what? Most of what you said is what we should do every day, regardless of where we are.
Right. I mean, that should just be standard operating procedure. It shouldn't take a crisis like this to bring this stuff to the surface. And that's why I really wanted to come back and have this conversation with you. And that's why I think that's why it got so much engagement on the blog, because there's nobody talking like this out in the space.
Right.
We make money in retail by building up an assortment, selling it down, and doing it again.
Yep.
Over and over again throughout the year. If you think you're gonna open up a retail store, or you're gonna be successful in retail by going out and putting this massive level of inventory out there that is gonna take you 7-8 months to move, you're in for a rude awakening. Coming back to our turn conversation, 2.5 turns for a footwear store. Somebody who's independent, you really need to be targeting 4 turns. That's a 90-day supply of inventory. That's still a lot of inventory.
It is.
So you got to keep your headlights on in these environments. You got to keep your headlines on all the time, regardless of the political environment. That's just the nature of the business, because there's a lot of forces. Even though we're opening up every day, there's a lot of forces that want to get in your pocket of cash, whether it's a vendor, whether it's your landlord, whether it's the tax man, the insurance company, the credit card company. You really got to have your wits about you in the way you operate your business. And step number 1 is controlling the inventory and making sure that the inventory isn't eating up all the cash, and that you have the capabilities to move that inventory so you can generate the cash to cover the flip side of all those other people trying to get in your pocketbook.
Exactly.
Yep. All right. So I like to close things out with my 5 points. All right.
Okay.
So if you could get every specialty retailer to change one behavior around inventory management tomorrow, what would it be?
Less is more.
Fantastic.
That's simple. Again, nobody ever went out of business by selling out of things.
Yep. Less is more. Less is velocity. It's more cash being generated. It's more opportunity to create new opportunities. Less is always more in retail sense.
Yep.
And if you're an independent retailer out there listening to this, I'm with you. I've been out there. I know what the feeling is. It's slow. You're looking at all this inventory on your walls, breathing down your neck. You got to figure out how to move it. Less is more. It's more manageable. It creates cash faster, and it's a way bigger safety zone to be in. We need to move sure-footed through these times, not only political environment, but just the retail environment. It takes a lot to get people in your door. It takes a lot to move this inventory. And you want to make sure that all of that is manageable. That's a great point. All right. So number 2, what's the biggest lie retailers tell themselves about inventory that keeps them trapped?
Tomorrow will be better. And yet that's why we're here, right? It's
Yep.
it's the trap that we fall into. As I started out in the beginning of this, retailers are an optimistic breed. And yeah, it wasn't so good today, but tomorrow's going to be better. It's great to think that. I'm not sure that's a smart way to plan your business.
Yeah, you got to, coming back to that retail fog, you got to have the fog lights on. You've got to be able to keep your eyes on the horizon. And really a big part of retail management, both at the operational side, the buying side, the marketing side, it's all about having your sight line on that horizon, and knowing how to manage it. I agree. Yep. All right. So the retailers who will thrive in the next 3 years are the ones who will do what?
Know their customer.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I like that. Know their customer. All right, so let's expand on that. I've told you my tactic through average selling price of how I like to zero in on the customer. What other tactics you got there?
Well, I think if you truly know who your customer is, then you're going to curate your assortment appropriately for them. You're also going to understand that it's likely that they're only going to buy 2 of whatever you're selling this season and not 5. And unless you're figuring out how to bring more new customers into the mix, and that's a whole nother game, you begin to create some guardrails here for yourself around what you're capable of doing as a retailer. So deep knowledge of your customer means you're going to make fewer mistakes. You're not going to buy things that they don't want, and much easier to execute around a relatively narrow customer base than the broad world out there.
Yep, I agree with that. I I always talk to a lot of my colleagues and counterparts about one of the biggest skill sets that a retailer has to have in any capacity, especially if you want to be an owner operator or if you want to be in any type of buying capacity, selling capacity. You've got to be able to separate yourself from your personal biases on the product and let the customer reveal themselves to you of where they want to spend money with you. It's one of the biggest pitfalls that you can, one of the biggest traps that you can fall into as a retailer is being caught up in your emotional state about product. The name of the game is to sell product, generate cash, cover the bills, and make money. It is not to be personally attached to the products that you have in your store. They're an ends to the means. Not that you can't be passionate about what you sell, but the types of products that you're passionate about might not be the customer that's coming into your store, and you need to understand how to identify them and understand how important it is to pile in on where that customer wants to do business and offer the most engaging assortment. All right, so number 4, if you were consulting with a small specialty retailer today, what's the first question you'd ask them about their inventory?
Age. And do they have some sort of metrics to measure age of inventory? Because sometimes it's not, you touched on this earlier and we got off the subject maybe too quick, quantity versus quality. As I was saying earlier, when we came out of the pandemic, the quantity of the inventory was the issue. And there was way too much inventory and everybody was fighting the way to get down to lower levels of inventory. Because of that, everybody was very conservative in their purchases going forward. And what was available at retail, the number was right in terms of its quantity, but the quality of that retail was low because it was safe and it wasn't new and it wasn't fresh. And so it really is the balance of those two things. And age tells you a lot about quality. If I've got half of my inventory is older than 6 months, I'm probably in trouble. And again, the metric changes by category, by the business that you're in. But there is a metric out there, and you always should be working on getting rid of the oldest inventory first, because that's the sickest inventory in the mix.
Yeah. And I think coming back to that turn conversation, it's you need to move this stuff quickly. It's trapped cash sitting there on your floor. The closer in you can move those supply lines, the more successful you're going to be overall. You touched on it earlier. The last transaction is always the worst one. Well, you don't want to have 37 last transactions. You constantly want to be having good new inventory flowing in on a regular basis that's generating new money for you to operate off of. If you start having situations where you have this stockpile of inventory that's stepping out in front of new goods, first off, you shouldn't be piling new inventory on top of aged goods. You need to get that stuff out of the way. But if you have all of these aged goods that are spoiling, that you're losing margin revenue on, that you're going to have to take markdowns on, and you're putting all that inventory out in front of good, fresh, new goods, the customer is always going to come in and buy those aged goods at the discounted price. And you cannot, as an independent retailer that's out on Main Street, that's got bills to cover and has employees to pay, you cannot afford to waste those opportunities of engagement with the customer on low quality transactions. That comes back to that quantity over quality conversation. That's a whole nother layer to that onion of low quality transactions. You can't have low quality items stepping out in front of fresh new goods. And you control all of that by understanding at the starting process and the buying process of what that horizon looks like down the line. Fantastic. All right. So closing it out here, this is an easy one for you. Where can retailers follow your work and stay connected with your insights?
Sure. Well, I'm on LinkedIn as a primary way I communicate now. I used to use other forms, but everything I publish on LinkedIn, and I comment on a lot of stuff. So you can follow me there. I'm tapped out on followers. I've got 30,000 connections, and LinkedIn doesn't let you have any more than 30,000 connections, but you can follow me anytime you want.
First off, I highly recommend you follow Matt. He posts some very insightful industry news on a regular basis. I find his feed to be very useful. It's funny you bring up 30,000 followers. Is that correct? You're at 30,000 followers?
Correct, yeah.
That's where you're tapped out at. We posted the first interview that we did last week on AI search, and I was talking to my guest about when I first opened my store. One of the biggest marketing pivots that I made was when I got on MySpace, and I was buying these bots. I had this girl that had come into my store that had this band, and they had all these followers, and she was just a local band. And I was asking her, I was like, "How'd you get all those followers?" And she was like, "Well, you can buy these bots for like $10, and you can go on somebody's page and just friend all their people." And I mean, I spent like 60, maybe $70 over the next month, and I bought all these bots, and I had like a 40,000 person following on MySpace. Couple of weeks later, it was huge marketing impact for my store. All of a sudden I had all these people coming in that didn't know about us, but I got capped. Same thing, 40,000 people. They were like, no more. So I found that I had to go back and I had to start editing out people that weren't engaging with me just so I could get real people on there. But funny
Yeah.
that you bring that up. So
Yeah, well,
anyways,
I did not use any bots here. This was
you
all
earned it. Good
hand-to-hand
job.
combat.
Good job. Good job. Hand-to-hand combat. I like that. You earned it the old school way.
Exactly.
Matt, I really appreciate your time today. This was a great conversation. I thank you. I wish you all the best of luck out there. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
No, glad to do it, and same for you. Thanks.
Thank you. Take care, Matt.